The Nerds of Comedy are back with another review of Marvel's What If. I'm Sean Devereaux. This is Ed Carden. We are here in the Push Comedy Theater, and we're going to be talking about Episode 2.
Yeah, so Episode 2 is What If T'Challa became Star-Lord?
Yeah, and I'm just going to come out right and say it. I wasn't a big fan of Episode 1. Episode 2, in love with it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that Episode 2 was a crowd pleaser, and it seems like the episode that really sold most people on the concept. I think that, like you, there were a lot of people that weren't like over the moon for Episode 1. I feel like most people liked it, but I feel like not a lot of people were in love with it. I think a lot of people were still kind of shaky on this concept, and I think this episode really knocked it out of the park, and people loved it.
Obviously, the main focus everybody's been talking about is obviously Chadwick Boseman reprising his role as Black Panther, especially now that, unfortunately he's no longer with us. So I think that had a lot to do with it. But I think just the story itself, I think it was like a great tribute to him, but also to his character or his version of the Black Panther.
Yeah, and my big thing with this is that this is one of those what-if stories that like would probably never exist in the comics. Like it is very specific to the MCU, and like it was one like because I remember watching the trailer, you see glimpses of T'Challa wearing the Starlord stuff. I'm like, okay, what's going on with this? Like
right.
How are they going to explain this? And it's like. The point of divergence again in this episode, it's a little flimsy.
I would say out of all of them, I would say this is even more thin than Agent Carter.
But, I mean, ultimately, like, the payoff and, like, what they do with it, it's pretty amazing.
It really is. I think this fact that you have Thanos in it, like, that was a huge...
That's the big reveal.
That's the big reveal.
Thanos is now a good guy in this reality.
Mm-hmm. And Nebula plays a huge role in this. I love how they kind of spent more time with the Ravagers than we kind of got in the Guardians movies. You have Taserface, you have
Kraglin.
Is that who is?
That's
Sean Gunn?
Yeah, that's Sean Gunn's
Okay,
character.
yeah, exactly. And then obviously you have Yondu is back. It's got this cool, almost like Ocean's 11 kind of heist feel to it, which is kind of cool.
And it's also like T'Challa is a much better Star-Lord than Peter Quill.
It really is. It's if you're a Guardians fan, you might be a little miffed about the short shrift that Star-Lord Peter Quill gets.
I mean, it's like with T'Challa being Star-Lord, it's the galaxy is practically like a utopia.
It really is. I mean, again, if you think about it, start really kind of pulling at the strings, it may fall apart. Just how optimistic T'Challa is and how that's just infected everyone around him. But somehow it works, and maybe that is kind of the power of Chadwick Boseman.
Yeah, and it's like with this episode, one of the things you talked about in our previous episode is like you're not a big fan of them kind of like going through the original story beats and like it's like I like seeing the minute differences. With this episode, like they definitely didn't do that. It was definitely very much its own thing, and I think people that are more into that, it's part of the reason why people really love this episode, and this episode really just did a good job of like exploring all the crazy things and all the crazy differences that could happen as a result of Peter Quill not being Star-Lord.
Right. And you get so many cool things. So I can never pronounce the actor's name, and I can't remember the character he plays at the beginning.
So you're thinking of Jaimin Unsu,
yeah.
and his character is Korath the Pursuer.
Okay, Korath, yeah. So I would say that's kind of the only scene that they recreate from the film is that opening scene. But it takes a quick turn.
And Korath is like, he's almost acting out of character, but like we don't really see much of his character in the original Guardians or Captain Marvel,
right,
which he's also in. Jaimin Unsu obviously had a lot of fun.
Yeah, I would say it was definitely a really kind of fun take on his character. And then on top of that, you also get Howard the Duck has a much larger role. Than,
Yeah, Seth Green reprised his small role in the post-credits tag of, I think it was.
Was it Guardians
Yeah,
2?
I think it was. I think it was Guardians 2. Maybe it was Guardians. The Collector was Guardians 1, so it was Guardians 1.
Okay. Yeah, I guess so. It's hard to remember. But no, I am kind of a fan of Howard the Duck. I did read some of the Steve Gerber stuff from back in the day.
No, it's like I've read a lot of it myself. I don't know why they decided to make it into a kids movie in the 80s. Howard the Duck, for those that don't know, is probably one of the most adult comics Marvel has ever released.
Right. And one of the worst rated, worst reviewed movies ever. And yet one of my wife's favorite movies.
I mean, it's. Here's the thing: when you're a kid, a lot of times you don't know movies are bad.
No, that is true. Case in point, my son Aiden, who is 8 years old, loves the Star Wars prequels.
You know, here's the thing: a lot of kids that grew up with those do.
When he was younger, about 4 or 5, he was a big Jar Jar fan. Now that he's gotten older and, he's spending a little bit more time on the internet, he's seen a lot of the Jar Jar hate and has kind of jumped on the bandwagon. And I always have to remind him that, it wasn't too long ago that you were a big, huge Jar Jar fan. You thought he was the greatest thing in the Phantom Menace.
I mean, one thing I'll say while we're on this tangent is like what you like. You
True.
know, it's like if you're into Jar Jar, screw all those people.
Yeah, more power to you.
Yeah.
All right, so from one Disney property back to another. Anything else you want to say about this particular episode?
One thing I liked is that they didn't totally abandon Peter Quill and like the whole ego subplot. That's kind of a big part of the MCU story arc. And so like you have that scene at the end where Ego does confront Peter Quill. And, it's like, it sort of implies that like, Ego's plan might succeed and like, the universe might end.
And I guess this is one of the things that I don't want to say always hated about What Ifs, but a lot of the stories that I really, really enjoyed, I always wanted to see what happens next. And unfortunately, with very few exceptions, everything was a one and done issue.
Every now and again.
Yeah.
But
they would mostly just leave it up to your imagination as to what was going to happen.
It's an anthology, What If, typically.
Yeah. But this universe or this particular multiverse, I wouldn't mind revisiting again.
I don't think many people would. I mean, like this episode just delivered pretty much. I mean, it was everything like a good What If story can be.
Mm-hmm. So for me, a huge rebound from episode 1. This is where I really kind of jumped on the What If bandwagon as far as the show. We've already talked about that I was a big fan of the comics.
I liked episode 1. After this episode, I was like, okay, I really, really like what they're doing with this show.
Now, will that stay for episode 3? Find out next week on the Nerds Comedy.